Welcome to our phenomenal podcast, where we come together to learn and grow through meaningful conversations. As leaders and entrepreneurs of our lives, we design our own experiences and empower ourselves to reach our full potential. Today, I am honored to introduce a very special guest who brings incredible maturity and wisdom to the human experience. Her passion for coaching and empowering others has truly inspired me, and I know that it will inspire you too. Our guest today started her journey as a finance executive in the corporate cosmetic manufacturing industry. But she did not stop there. She went on to becoming the CEO of her own bakery and even joined a startup company that experienced exponential growth and eventual sale. But that's not all. Her deep love for the human experience and her desire to nurture companies, starting with their leaders, led her to become a certified executive coach. So, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce the incredible and inspiring leader of our time, Helen Junda.
So Helen, thank you so much for joining me today on Believe in Yourself, Heart and Mind podcast. It's incredible to really take that first step of sharing your story and for us to learn more about you. So in your background, you have a certain quote that you tend to really love and think about. It's called, "Where there is fear, there is growth." Could you help us start there and maybe tell a little bit more about yourself in the meantime?
Yeah, so thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm more proud of my clients than myself, and you are a really great client. So thank you for inviting me and hosting this. Yeah, where there is fear, there is growth. It resonates with me my whole life. I grew up with a lot of fear. I had learning disabilities, and I knew someplace inside me that the fear was shutting me down. And I decided that I needed to make fear my friend. So when I heard that quote, where there is fear, there is growth, I turned my fear into a tool to kind of achieve more and strive more. So to me, when I feel fear or I see it in my clients, I'm like, that means there is tremendous growth available, expansion. Most of us see it as something to run from, something to hide from, something to protect from. And I say run into it, because that's where you're going to grow. And life and anything you do is about growth.
And you show that many, many times. Again, did it come from a place where someone taught you that, or maybe you read in a book? Like, what really helped you to say fear is where there's growth, and I believe in it, I'm just going to do it, even if I have all these challenges? What really inspired you to continue each step?
It's really funny going all the way back and thinking about this now, that I feel like I'm a much more fully realized woman. But back then, I knew innately, and my intuition knew, that the fear was blocking me. I don't know how I knew that. I just knew it. And I think from as early as when I first started to go to school, my fear had come up about learning, because my brain didn't work like everybody else's. So, and none of the teachers really knew that, but I knew that. And that was my first experience of going inward and being like, I know I'm smart and I'm struggling here. What's going on? And one of the things that happened, my mom took me to, I don't know, the person at school that evaluates you. I don't even know what her name is. And they gave me an IQ test, and they were like, this doesn't make sense. She has a really high IQ, but she's having learning problems. So I started to realize that my fear was just irrationally coming up because I defined it as something to run away from. And when I decided that the only thing to fear was my ability to think of it differently. So I started to believe that when I felt fearful was my chance to expand and grow. And I think I believed that, because when they took the IQ test, I'm like, I knew I was smart. It's funny.
That certainty you have, it resonates with you still to this day. And it's really cool the way you speak about your story with this, this light of, I didn't have certain things, but you still looked on it as with love, I think, like the way you're explaining and expressing it, it just shows that the way we could have thought about it as like, oh, I really struggled and therefore this is, a terrible life experience and, that, empowered me or whatever the case may be. But for when you explained it, it's, I knew I was smart and there was like all these different things that are still working for me, even though there were some challenges. And I also, it also gave me this realization. There's this intuition I have, and I can't really explain it, but I just know that this really that opportunity helped me to understand more about myself. And I didn't run away from it. I embraced it. And now you are the version of yourself today because you embrace all those, that part of yourself, which is really great. And I wanted to just tie that into your thoughts about thinking and then maybe the brain itself, about how we can develop and grow personally, and what is that connection to the mindset, to the brain, and maybe about life balance there.
So it's funny, when I didn't know how my brain worked, I don't think, even up until these last 10 years, I think neuroscience has taken huge quantum leaps in understanding the functionality of the brain. So when I started, there were things just like me knowing I was smart. When I was in the corporate world, I wasn't the smartest, most talented person, but what I did have was my intuition, my emotional intelligence. I was able to self-regulate. These things came from a place where nobody teaches you this. It just was there for me. And I actually believe it was because my brain had to rely on that side of it, or that pieces of it, because my other side of my brain was not functioning optimally. So I grew this side of my brain. So when I started to realize my power was that, and when I realized I was a really powerful leader because of that, that's when I started to realize my talent is not finance, even though I was an amazing finance person. My talent was mentoring, coaching, leading. And that was using all of those skills I was talking about. And that's why when I finally realized that was my purpose, I went back to coaching school. And through coaching school, they started talking about neuroscience and how your brain works. And I started to get really curious about that more because of the struggles I had when I was growing up. How does the brain work? Why do I have an affinity towards numbers and logic, and I don't always know how to read and spell well? That was what was holding me back. What is that all about? So I started to go in my own little, I called it YouTube University, and I really started to look into neuroscience and how it's working. And even though I am not an expert, there is so much about the brain that is so interesting to me and provides so much support to all of us, not just breathing, seeing, smelling, tasting, but there's a deeper thing that's going on that needs to be recognized and tapped into for our personal development. So I really got into learning how the brain connects to your emotions, to your spirit, and mostly to your inner self or your inner voice. And I use that in my coaching practice on a daily basis. I talk to you about this all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And where's that balance? I feel like the brain, even biologically, is set up in two spheres, the right sphere and the left sphere. And they both function very differently. And there's no science around either your left brain or your right brain. That's actually a misnomer. No, that's never been proven, even though people talk about that. The proof in the science is not there on that. What is there is that your left brain fires much stronger when you're trying to be analytical and when you're trying to be mathematical and logical. And the right side fires more when you are emotional or intuitive or creative. But there is a nerve that flows down the middle of your brain that's called the corpus callosum. And the corpus callosum is what makes the left brain and the right brain talk to each other. And that's where I see the balance. It's like the yin and the yang. If you ever look at the yin and the yang sign, it almost looks like a very simple version of the brain, right? So that's what creates for me balance, that you can't just come at, I tell my clients, and I might have said this to you, you can't just be thinking your way through a problem. You have to also feel your way through a problem. And that to me is the balance of using both sides of your brain, your tuition, your creativity, and your logic.
You broke it down really well, in saying that you're not left brain or right brain, and that you're actually both, but it's just that maybe one is doing more of the work in the moment than the other. So let's say you were talking about the example of that young version of yourself. You're like super intelligent, right? It shows. And you were using your logical side, but then there was a struggle on maybe that right side of the brain, perhaps on expressing or anything like that. So I'm wondering, how did you, without even having that coaching experience, how did you work on your right side of the brain? And what did it take to have that balance of left and right throughout those years?
This is a really interesting question. And no one's ever asked me this, but the truth is my fear was the pathway to tapping into my right side of my brain. And the reason was that I was struggling in school. I couldn't memorize the words. I didn't know how to spell the words like everybody else. Reading was a struggle. I found out later I was dyslexic. But it was the right side of my brain that got me through. I would read a few words I understood and I put the rest of the pieces together. And the reason that happened was because my spirit and my emotion just kind of figured it out. I was like, I'm missing something here, but I know that this is where this story is going. I felt it more than saw it, right? And that's when I realized, without knowing it, I must have been like 3rd grade, 4th grade. And I said, oh, that side of my brain is firing. I can feel it. I know. And that's where I was able to get through school. And then all of a sudden, it was like a miracle. One day when I embraced that and stopped being afraid of learning different than the other children, I started to excel. And then by the time I was in high school, I was a straight A student.
That's incredible. You start off with fear and emotion, right? And you use as a guide. And you essentially taught yourself to believe that fear is telling you something valuable and that you're going to learn something from it. Because I know that, in general, people talk about fear. It's like we want to run away from things that makes us afraid, right? And I think that's what you were saying when you said the intuition, the other side of yourself, right? There's that part of your human spirit or your brain, right, that is saying, no, there's something about fear that's still very good, and let's listen to it. And I think that's a valuable lesson in itself, that all of our emotions are just guides instead of something to be afraid of. Like, we don't need to be afraid of our emotions or like try to push it away or push it down, right? We can let it come up and observe it for what it is and listen. So I think my other thoughts on that is, how have you used all of these different techniques when you're working with leaders, right? People who are CEOs, people who you would say kind of figure it out and like they probably, know all these things that you're talking about. Why does your technique still work with them? And how are they still thinking about working on themselves that we don't know of?
I think sometimes when I'm working with a leader, a CEO, a CFO, whoever it is, a CMO, they come to want to work on a specific thing. And then all of a sudden we start talking, and I realize very quickly that they're struggling with imposter syndrome, or they're very technical and very tactical, and they're losing sight of the other things around them that need to be addressed to be a powerful leader. I don't think people resonate with a leader that doesn't understand emotional behavior, that doesn't understand how to self-regulate. And a lot of times you get to the top because you have these skills, but there are many times you get to the top and you've gotten there because you're really good at what you do, or you worked really long for a company, or you were at the right place at the right time. And then you get there, just like I got to school, and all of a sudden the fear comes in, and I'm like, what am I going to do? And then you need an outside person's perspective. And what I do is help them get more insightful. I lead them to bigger perspectives. I talk to them about the softer skills that might be missing. How often do you take a break and just let your brain be so that you can spend time letting your intuition come up? What is your intuition telling you about laying off 10,000 people? What spiritually is coming up for you? What's another path that way? You know, these leaders of companies have so much responsibility on them, and they affect people's lives. It's an enormous responsibility that I think keeps them up at night. And I don't think that without the emotional support of their own self-regulation, that you could really manage it. So you need to learn how to self-regulate, right? How do you decide that you're going to get rid of a whole division of people without really understanding what your emotions are around it? So that's how I help them. I help them get some insights into their own belief system. I think a belief is a thought you think over and over again, and it becomes your belief. Sometimes you think over and over again the wrong thought, and nobody's telling you that because nobody knows your thoughts, right? So when I talk to somebody and I start to get to understand their thoughts, and they come up with a belief, I'm like, you know, have you ever challenged that belief? Where did that belief come from? So that's how I help them.
So you spoke so much about this internal dialogue and that people tend to have. Like you were saying, sometimes people will be waking up at night, you know, thinking about their decisions and how it impacts so many different individuals, you know, hiring someone or firing people. And then there's this human aspect to it. And I was just thinking like on a tangent, but maybe not so, that it's like similar to our conversation with AI and how people, you know, talk about, oh, maybe AI can like really take over and help us with so many different things. But if AI is capable of just firing people, right, just based on skill sets or resume or whatever, it wouldn't ever have to wake up at night or like fear or all these different things. And so the human, you know, the really neat piece about being human is that we have this intuition, which is an advantage to our species, you could say, in that we're able to empathize and understand that if we were in their shoes or someone else's shoes, that seems decision that we are making, how would we feel and how would that affect our lives, right? So I thought that was really neat that you're bringing out this human element, because I know that what you're saying is, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, that CEOs or leaders, they're so used to this go, 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 like what's next, and this logical side of things, that they almost lose sight of the other human intuitive side that needs a reminder. And people like you who coach, you know, our world leaders and CEOs, right? You're helping them to stay in tune and attached, you could say, to this foundation, the groundwork of what even led them to where they are today.
Yeah. So
And
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. And I was just gonna say, like, if you have more thoughts on that, then feel free to share. But I can go on to the next thing if you.
No, I was just saying we're all human before we're a CEO or a CFO or a woman or a man. The commonality between everything is we're all human. We're all having a human experience. So it is the thread that holds us together.
Yeah. And when you think about this human thread, there are some probably common issues. What are some of those? I think you mentioned some of that are a little bit already, of like making decisions, but what are some common issues that people might be facing when it comes to balance? Specifically, how can we work on that?
Yeah, people have a lot of trouble with balance because within that, even the term balance, the vocabulary is that you have to make a choice, one or the other, right? Or you're blending. I like to use the word, let's blend our life and our work. I like blending better than balance. But the things that people struggle with is, my job is everything. It's putting food on the table. It's sending my kids to school. I have a beautiful house. They identify a lot with the value of work. And sometimes they forget that the rest of it is just as important, that you would be a better worker if you balanced, time at home with your family, or self-care, or I don't know what you're into, bike riding, meditation, running. Those things need to be addressed, because that creates not just balance it creates balance in your brain, it creates balance in your spirit. And I think you come to the table of a CFO or a manager or a leader with your cup more full. What does that mean? I'm more full of the things that a human experience are giving me. That's how I'm going to relate to everybody else. That's how I'm going to relate to myself. That's how I bring my authenticity to the table. If I'm just nose down, work, that's not a full person. That's not a full life. So many people come with, I'm stressed out, I can't sleep. Well, because you're not doing anything to self-care. All you're doing is working.
That's interesting. So you're almost saying that everyone's version of balance is going to be very different, and it comes from looking at what you might be interested in, or maybe what you're overdoing, and then kind of taking a step back and thinking about what other things you could be doing. So it's like a sense of reassessment on your actions, behavior, to what you're thinking about all day long, and what you actually enjoy or love. Or I think what you might probably want to say is like what inspires you, right?
Yeah.
Things like that.
It's funny that you bring that up, because sometimes I'll ask an executive, well, what inspires you? And the first session, they have no idea. They have no idea. A work inspires me. What about work inspires you? And they just go back to work, and it becomes apparent in my first session with them that there's not very much there but work. And then we start to explore that. If work went away, I ask a powerful question. If work went away, what would you be doing? And I get a strong blank screen. So sometimes that's like the best question to ask when someone has to stop and think about it.
And that's interesting that you say that powerful question, and then people don't really know how to answer that. It's, I think, similar to that imposter syndrome of like having to, you either that version or you're not kind of thing, and or you kind of deny. So it's almost like an identity issue. And if you were to take away that crutch of identity, right? Let's say you're a CEO and you're no longer a CEO, who are you?
Right.
And so we go through all these different roles to kind of say this is our worth and our value to the society. Can you talk a little bit more about imposter syndrome maybe, and how what do you think about it? And I think I'll just name for quickly that what I found online is it says that imposter syndrome is basically the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skills. So again, it's an inability to believe that they are basically successful, or that is based on their skills or efforts. Do you agree to any of these, or like any thoughts?
Yeah, the word that resonated with me in that definition is persistently thinks that they're unable, right? So our thoughts, if you change your thoughts, you change your life. So if you're constantly thinking, I don't deserve this, I'm not, why would anybody want me to lead a company? Why was anybody think I have the answers? Why do I believe I could be a coach? You keep telling your brain that you're not enough, that you're not able, that you're unworthy, you're unvaluable. And I am telling you, you think those things long enough, that's what you become. And I believe the thoughts in our head make an impact on our brain too. They build neural pathways The brain doesn't care that they're negative thoughts. They build a pathway. So I try to help my clients redirect the thinking. Let's think of the most positive thing. Why do you think you're a great leader? Tell me your leadership qualities. What kind of schools did you go to? Well, you went to Kellogg and Dartmouth. How could you possibly think that you're not capable of doing this? The distance between being a great leader and, your imposter syndrome is really just redirecting your thoughts. Telling yourself, I'm not going to think that thought anymore. It's a choice. So many times I say to a client, your thoughts are choices. You wake up in the morning and you think of the same thing all the time. That's a choice. It becomes a habit. It becomes a routine. So like any habit and any routine, you have to break it with a new habit or replace it with something different. So when I start to realize somebody has imposter syndrome, I start working on building their confidence. I start asking them to do things that they don't feel an imposter about. Because what that does, it starts firing up the thoughts in your brain that need to replace the ones that are telling you you are an imposter. And sometimes the client doesn't see how the dots are connecting. Oh, because I'm a good volleyball player, how does that make me now a good coach? Well, you're just starting to feel that feeling of being confident and doing something that feels good and feels right and feels authentic. It starts to wire over to the other sides of your thinking when you're talking about being a CEO or a coach or a CFO or whatever it is.
Yeah, I love that you said imposter syndrome at its core is essentially what kind of thoughts you allow in your head. And if you have thoughts that are telling you you're not worthy, you can't do this, and all these different things are basically going against who you can be, then you're gonna find evidence for that. And I know that like the brain has the ability to look for evidence, right? It's gonna say, well, yeah, you're right to that, right? If you believe that, your brain's gonna confirm it. And if you do the opposite and you say, well, no, I'm great at this, like volleyball, or I'm really good at baking, and I make amazing gift cards, things like, or cards, right? And things like that, then your brain's gonna look for that too. So I love that you said, start with what you feel good knowing you can do, and that you have no conception of like what imposter syndrome looks like for that particular thing you already do well. And I think that seems to be groundbreaking for a lot of people. Would you say that that's the case in terms of what you see in your career, or maybe even in coaching? And how could we learn to detect imposter syndrome in its core
Well, sometimes it starts like what we talked about with fear. It starts with fear, like, I don't know. In a lot of ways, if this is a complicated concept, to me, when somebody tells me that they feel like an imposter, it's almost like they're afraid not to be an imposter because they don't believe they deserve, right? So you got to get to the core belief of where the imposter syndrome is coming from. What's the core value that you believe? What are you telling yourself? Who told you you're an imposter? Or maybe a better question that I ask a lot that uncovers it and gives an insight is, if you weren't an imposter, what could you achieve? If you thought you were an expert, what would you achieve? And all of a sudden that breaks down the wall of, oh, yeah, if I wasn't an imposter, then I would do this and I would do that. And all of a sudden the thoughts start to flow to the place where the expansion is, right? And I think sometimes for the very first time, someone realizes, wow, I could choose to think this instead. But I think everybody's path is different. Everybody's thoughts are different. And it's an individual thing that you have with a client. Sometimes they need to trust me first to take them there. So trust is a big part of our back and forth or our questioning. But mostly, to get rid of imposter syndrome, you've got to almost fake it till you make it a little bit. You got to start believing in yourself when maybe everything else is firing up, telling you not to believe it. Because what that does is your thoughts are telling you one thing, but you have a desire inside to do whatever it is you're doing. That desire
Mhm.
came from a deep feeling of wanting to do it. So why are you pushing it down? Let it come out, let it flourish. I tell clients, let's say that we redefine our idea of success. Let's say you're going to fail 50% of the time, and that's successful. When you kind of give them the permission that failure is not something to stop you, all of a sudden, sometimes the thoughts quiet down. Like, it's okay. I might fail at being a coach the first 15 people I coach, but that's okay. The other 15 people I nailed.
Yeah. You know, as you were talking, it sounded similar, failure and imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome seems to be focused on failure, some things that don't go well, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people are also afraid of failing.
Mm-hmm.
But if, like you were saying, if we kind of undid that or undo that, we would just be like, oh, let's just remove imposter syndrome. It doesn't really, it's not my friend. Like, I don't need it right now. I know what it is, but I don't need to surround myself with it. Same with failure. It's like, oh, I see it, but like, I can still redefine my successes and see anything that I do is just a learning experience. So it's like, once you can redefine that for yourself, and reevaluate how you think, you're able to break down the barriers that seem to limit you.
Yeah, you break down the barrier between you and yourself. So it's like my fear when I was growing up. So fear, imposter syndrome, failure, they're all guideposts to start going deeper, to find out where did that belief system come from that you can't be this thing you want to be. Who's telling you that? Why? Where did that come up in your life? How come you're afraid? How come you feel like a failure? Why don't we just forget about making fear our enemy and failure our enemy? Let's redefine it. I redefine fear as growth. Let's redefine failure as making 50% of the time you're going to win. It's a mindset shift. That's what that is. That's a mindset shift.
Yeah, so it sounds like the key takeaway here for our session today is that don't let fear hold you back. Instead, embrace it and redefine your purpose or vision of who you actually are. Was there anything else you think needed to be said as a key takeaway?
Yeah, I think the key takeaway is that feelings and thoughts are guideposts for you to learn about yourself. That's all they are. They're not facts. Most of the things we tell ourselves in our heads are not true. They're stories we're making up to support the narrative that we built over the life of our lifetime. So that's what a good coach will do with our powerful questions and our listening, not just to their words, but their body, their eyes, their thoughts, their body language. We start to realize what's deeper. Let's go deeper. So the takeaway is use your emotions or your imposter syndrome as a guidepost to learn more about yourself.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Helen. So where can people find you, or how can they work with you if they want to work with
I
you?
put it in the chat. I don't know if the chat's going to come up on will it? I put it in the chat, but if you wanted to talk to me about some of my coaching or anything else, you can get me at my email at Helen Junda, which is JUNDA @gmail.com, or my phone number 516-220-0758.
All right, awesome. So everyone, now you can contact Helen, let her know what you're working on and how you can be a better version of yourself, and she will help you break through those barriers that will allow you to become that person you want to be. So the final question here is, who or what inspires you today, yesterday, any day?
So I want to say there's been so many inspirational people in my life along my way, but my biggest inspiration lately has been my clients. And the reason I say that is because that's what I spend most of my time doing. So I feel like you have to live in the now in your life, and that's where the inspiration comes from. So I tell people I learn something different and new every time I coach somebody, and I grow and I expand. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things in my life now, that this has come to me at this time in my life, that I get as much as I give back.
That's amazing. Thank you for that insight. And thank you for being open, vulnerable, sharing about your childhood experience, and for us to learn so much about what you do each day, Helen, and the kind of impact that you're growing because you started believing in yourself. You grew this practice. You have shaped so many lives for the better. And in essence, I think you are an inspiring. Let's continue creating conversations like these, and also design our life for experiences as leaders and entrepreneurs. Thank you, Helen, for joining me on today's podcast. And everyone, I hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, hello there, friends. So I started my podcast in 2023 of this year, back in March. First, I worked with using Buzzsprout as a platform to just upload MP3 files, and was mostly talking with myself, sharing stories of what I thought was valuable at the time. And my audience, I was thinking, was the people who are working on themselves, and I considered them to be like entrepreneurs, constantly developing their mental, emotional health and relationships, to thinking and becoming more aware about where they are in life and how they want to become from version A to version B of themselves, the better part of who they can be. And that's just reaching their potential. So for me, podcasting is a way to develop not just more skills of becoming a great speaker and connector of other stories and human experiences, but also for me to become more self-aware in how I listen, how I treat people and connect with others. It's just a really amazing space to be able to do all those things and more. So storytelling through conversations, it started because growing up, I really struggled with speaking and talking. It is something that I'm still working on. But growing up, I really had a difficult time sharing what was in my heart and my mind. It just felt like everything was very separate, and that I didn't deserve to really speak, even though I had a voice, I could talk for myself, and yet it was more of a social, cultural tendency to silence myself because I thought I just didn't belong or deserve to share anything. And until someone gave me permission, then I would speak. So being able to talk and know what I wanted for a really long time was a very difficult and challenging process. And I'm just very, very proud of myself for where I am today, where now I can talk to people, hear them, and connect with other people. So it means a lot to me to be able to do that today. And storytelling through conversation is a really important part of acknowledging my story, and to also acknowledge other people's stories, that it's through conversations where people get a chance to hear themselves, and for others to hear and recognize that they're not the only person going through different situations or experiences. Mostly just letting people know they're not alone. And then there's also the process of learning something where your brain is picking up information subconsciously, and at times through the information that you expose yourself to, you can actually choose to challenge yourself and work on developing certain skills and habits. And I believe that through conversations, we're exposing ourselves to a different way of thinking. And through there, it allows us to become more engaged with our life experiences so that we can become the version that we want to be. Well, the first episode of this experience with Helen was super, super duper amazing. I love her very much because she's just an amazing life coach. She has really helped me to develop my ability to connect with my intuition, something that is really hard for me for some reason. Is just again working with my brain and my personality and getting to become more aware of myself. I have this tendency to speak and not know exactly how I'm feeling. So Helen does a really great job of helping me to process my life experiences, and she just listens so well. She's very empathetic. I'm just so grateful that she is my first guest. She is just someone who's just very, very supportive. So without her, I wouldn't be able to share this amazing experience with you. And thank you so much, Helen. Just wanted to let you know how incredibly grateful I am, and to many more episodes to come as I bring on more different kind of individuals to share their stories and inspire hundreds of people, millions of people for generations to come. That's what my dream is to really engage with so many different young people and even older people who are working on themselves. So looking forward to developing our life stories and selves, right? Ourselves with you. So let's go. Let's do it. Let's do it together. I'm really excited. Believe it or not, one of the biggest fears that I have is in having conversations with people. And yet at the same time, it is through conversations with other individuals that I have grown so much, that I have gone out of my own head and start thinking from someone else's perspective, or even allowing myself to build skills that helps me to welcome empathy into my life and help me to connect with other people. Storytelling is an art and an experience that we can all have. So I'd love for you to join me by hitting the like, subscribe, and comment below to let me know exactly what are some kind of conversations you love to have that will change your life. Or if you're not sure, what kind of conversations would you want starting where you are today? Thank you.